My name is Emma. I'm 32 years old, and for a long time I believed that love meant always having someone by your side. I believed that if life ever knocked me down, the person I loved would be the first one to reach out and help me back up. I was wrong. Sometimes you don't discover who someone really is during the best days of your life. You discover it on the worst day imaginable. This is the story of the day my boyfriend walked away. The day I realized I had been loving someone who was never truly there for me, and how losing him became the beginning of finding myself. It all started on a rainy Friday afternoon in Seattle. I had just finished another exhausting day at the marketing firm where I'd worked for nearly 6 years. The office was unusually quiet. Most of my coworkers were already talking about weekend plans. Some were heading to the mountains. Others couldn't stop talking about backyard barbecues and family dinners. I remember smiling politely while packing my laptop into my bag. Jake and I had plans that evening. Nothing fancy, just dinner at our favorite little Italian restaurant downtown. Life felt normal. Then my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. "Is this Emma Carter?" The woman's voice sounded calm, but something about her tone made my stomach tighten. "Yes. This is Harborview Medical Center." The next few words changed everything. "Your sister Sophie has been involved in a serious car accident." My knees almost gave out beneath me. I grabbed the edge of my desk to keep myself from falling. "What?" "She's in surgery right now. You should come as soon as possible." I don't even remember hanging up. Everything became blurry. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. There was only one person I wanted beside me. Jake. I called him immediately. He answered after the second ring. "Hey, babe." The moment I heard his voice, I broke down. "Jake, please. Sophie's been in a terrible accident. I'm on my way to the hospital. Please come with me. I can't do this alone." There was silence. Not the comforting kind. The uncomfortable kind. Finally, he sighed. "Emma." "I don't think I can." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" He sounded almost annoyed. "I already told the guys I'd meet them at the lake this weekend." "It's all booked. If I cancel now, everyone will be upset." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jake!" "My little sister might die." "I just need you with me." Another pause. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You're strong. You'll figure it out. I'll check on you later." And before I could say another word, he hung up. I stood frozen in the parking lot, staring at my phone long after the call had ended. The screen slowly went dark. So did something inside me. I kept waiting for it to ring again. Maybe Jake would call back. Maybe he'd realized what he'd just done. Maybe he'd say he was already on his way. But the phone stayed silent. I wiped my tears, got into my car, and drove to Harborview Medical Center alone. It was pouring rain. The windshield wipers moved back and forth, but they couldn't clear the blur in front of my eyes. I don't remember much about that drive. Only the fear. The endless fear. When I arrived at the hospital, a nurse led me to the surgical waiting room. The walls were pale gray. The lights were painfully bright. Families sat quietly, holding hands, praying, crying. I had no one. A nurse handed me a clipboard full of emergency forms. My hands shook so badly that I could barely write my own name. "Are you here alone?" she asked gently. I forced a smile. "Yes." The word hurt more than I expected. Hours passed. Every time the operating room doors opened, my heart jumped. Every doctor walking toward me made it hard to breathe. Finally, a surgeon stepped into the waiting room.
"Emma?"
I stood so quickly that my chair tipped over. He smiled softly. "Your sister made it through surgery." The air rushed back into my lungs. "But That single word terrified me. She suffered multiple fractures and a serious head injury. The next 48 hours will be critical. I nodded, barely holding myself together. Can I see her? For a few minutes. Nothing prepares you for seeing someone you love connected to machines. Sophie's face was covered with bruises. Her arm was in a cast. There were tubes everywhere. She looked so small, so fragile. I took her hand carefully. It was cold. I'm here, I whispered. You don't have to fight alone. The words caught in my throat, because deep down, I realized that I was the one fighting alone. That evening, I finally looked at my phone. No missed calls, no text messages, nothing from Jake. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. For one hopeful second, I thought it was him. Instead, it was an Instagram notification. Jake had posted a new photo. He was standing beside a lake with his friends. They were laughing, holding fishing poles. The sunset painted the sky behind them. The caption read, "Best weekend ever. Exactly what I needed." I stared at the screen. Then I quietly locked my phone. Something inside me finally broke. Not because he chose a weekend trip, but because he knew where I was. He knew my sister was lying in intensive care. He knew I was terrified. And somehow, none of that mattered enough for him to show up. That night, sitting beside Sophie's hospital bed, I made a promise to myself. If she survived, if we both made it through this, I would never again beg someone to love me. Because real love doesn't disappear when life becomes inconvenient. It stays, even when everything else falls apart. I just didn't know. The hardest truth about Jake was still waiting for me. The next morning, I woke up in the uncomfortable chair beside Sophie's hospital bed. I hadn't really slept. Every beep from the heart monitor had kept me on edge. A nurse walked in with a gentle smile. "You should get some breakfast," she said. "Your sister is stable for now." Stable. It wasn't the word I wanted to hear, but it was better than the alternative. I stepped into the hospital cafeteria and bought a cup of coffee I barely touched. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. Finally. Jake. I answered immediately. "Emma." His voice sounded normal. Too normal. "How's your sister?" I couldn't believe it. That was all he had to say. I took a deep breath. "She's still in intensive care." "I was hoping you'd be here." There was a short pause. "I'm sorry," he replied. "I've just been really busy." Busy. That single word echoed in my head. Busy enjoying a lake house with his friends. Busy posting smiling pictures online. Busy living his life while mine was falling apart. I closed my eyes. "Jake, I didn't need you to fix anything. I just needed you to hold my hand," he sighed. I said I was sorry. "I don't know what else you want me to do." For the first time in 4 years, I had no answer. Not because I forgave him, because I finally understood something. You can't convince someone to care. Either they do, or they don't. "I have to go," I said quietly. Then I ended the call. 3 days later, Sophie finally woke up. Her voice was weak. Her eyes were barely open. The first thing she whispered was, "Where's Jake?" I forced a smile. "He couldn't make it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she squeezed my hand. Barely, but enough. "You deserve better." I looked away before she could see the tears forming again. Even lying in a hospital bed, she could see what I had refused to admit for years. A week later, Sophie was moved out of intensive care. The doctors expected a full recovery, but it would take months of physical therapy. I visited every day after work. One evening, while helping her organize the flowers people had sent, she suddenly asked, "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When was the last time Jake showed up when you needed him?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. Images flashed through my mind. When my grandmother passed away, he skipped the funeral because he had football tickets. When I had pneumonia, he visited for 15 minutes before leaving to watch a game with his friends. When I got promoted at work, he forgot to congratulate me. Yet somehow, I had always found excuses for him. He was tired. He was stressed. He didn't mean it. The truth was painful. This wasn't the first time he had abandoned me. It was simply the first time I could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. Sophie smiled sadly. You've been carrying this relationship by yourself. Her words hit harder than she realized. Because deep inside, I knew she was right. That night, I drove back to the apartment Jake and I shared. His suitcase was sitting by the front door. He had just returned from his weekend trip. He looked up from the couch. Hey, as if nothing had happened. As if the worst week of my life had been just another ordinary week. I stood there quietly. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was simply exhausted. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something changing. Not heartbreak, not sadness, something quieter. Acceptance. I looked at the man I had loved for 4 years. And for the very first time, I wondered what my life would look like without him. Jake looked up from the couch and smiled. Hey. That one word felt strange, like it came from a complete stranger. He walked toward me as if everything between us was perfectly normal. You've been at the hospital a lot, he said. I figured you needed some space. I stared at him. Space? Was that really how he saw it? I wasn't asking for space, Jake. I was asking for you. He shrugged. I already apologized. I don't know why you're still making such a big deal out of this. I felt something inside me go completely quiet. Not anger, not sadness, just silence. For years, I had imagined this conversation. I thought I'd yell. I thought I'd cry. Instead, I simply asked, do you know what the nurse asked me the night Sophie was admitted? He looked confused. What? She asked if I was alone. I paused. And I had to say yes. His expression barely changed. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did. The room fell silent. A few seconds later, Jake rubbed the back of his neck. I think you're being emotional. That sentence hurt more than anything else he'd said. Not because it was cruel, because it proved he still didn't understand. He didn't understand loneliness. He didn't understand fear. He didn't understand love. The following weekend, I stayed with Sophie while she recovered at her apartment. She still needed help walking. Simple things like making breakfast or carrying groceries had become difficult. One afternoon, while we were folding laundry together, she looked at me and smiled. You know, I used to be jealous of your relationship. I laughed softly. Seriously? You two always looked so perfect. I looked down at the towel in my hands. We weren't. We just looked that way. She nodded. That's the scary part. Sometimes the happiest couples are only happy in photographs. Her words stayed with me. That evening, I scrolled through my phone. Picture after picture, beach vacations, holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, smiling faces, perfect moments. But now, I remembered what happened before and after every photo. The arguments, the excuses, the disappointments. I finally realized something. Social media had been telling one story. My heart had been living another. Monday morning, I returned to work. My coworkers welcomed me back with kind words and hugs. One of them, Melissa, handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a handwritten card signed by everyone in the office. It read, "We're here for you. You don't have to carry this alone." I smiled through tears. These were people who weren't even family. Yet, somehow, they had shown me more compassion in 1 week than Jake had shown me in 4 years. That afternoon, I received another text from him. Jake, are we still going to my parents' barbecue this Saturday? I read the message 3 times. Not once did he ask how Sophie was doing. Not once did he ask how I was feeling. He only wanted to know if I would show up for another family event. For the first time, I didn't answer. I put my phone face down on my desk. And I realized something I should have understood years ago. Sometimes, the hardest person to walk away from is the one you've spent years hoping will finally become the person you needed all along. I ignored Jake's message. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't rush to explain myself. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to keep the peace. Hours passed. Then another text appeared. Jake. Seriously? You're not answering me? A few minutes later, Emma, don't be childish. I stared at the screen. It amazed me how someone could notice silence, but never notice pain. That night, I went back to Sophie's apartment after work. She was sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset. She smiled when she saw me. You look different. I laughed softly. I do? You seem lighter. I thought about that for a moment. She was right. Nothing in my life had become easier. My sister was still recovering. I was emotionally exhausted. But somehow, I felt lighter. Maybe because I had finally stopped carrying someone who had never carried me. 2 days later, Jake showed up at my apartment without calling. I had just walked in from work when I heard a knock. When I opened the door, he was standing there holding a bouquet of flowers. Can we talk? I stepped aside and let him in. He placed the flowers on the kitchen counter. I know you're upset. I've been thinking. I probably should have come to the hospital. Probably. Even now. He couldn't fully admit he had been wrong. I'm sorry if I hurt you. If, that tiny word told me everything. He still didn't understand. I'm not angry anymore, Jake, I said quietly. He looked relieved. Good. I knew we'd get past this. I shook my head. You don't understand. I'm not angry. I'm done. The smile disappeared from his face. What does that mean? It means I can't spend the rest of my life wondering whether you'll be there the next time everything falls apart. He laughed nervously. Emma, you're ending 4 years over one mistake? I looked him in the eyes. No. I'm ending 4 years of excuses. The room became silent. He opened his mouth several times but couldn't find the right words. Finally, he asked, So, that's it? I nodded. Yes. He picked up his jacket. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. I think you'll regret this. I answered with complete honesty. I already regret staying as long as I did. He walked out. The door closed behind him. And for the first time in years, the apartment felt peaceful. A month passed. Sophie's recovery was going better than anyone expected. She had started walking without assistance. Her smile had returned. Mine had too. One Saturday morning, we visited a small farmer's market near the waterfront. As we walked between the booths, someone called my name. Emma? I turned around. It was Jake. He looked surprised. Then his eyes shifted toward Sophie. I'm really glad you're okay, he said. Sophie thanked him politely. There was an awkward silence. Jake looked back at me. You look happy. I smiled. I am. For the first time, it wasn't a smile I was forcing. It was real. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about us. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I believed he meant it. But sometimes, a sincere apology comes too late. I hope you've learned something, I said gently. I have. But I'm not the person who's supposed to benefit from that lesson. He lowered his eyes. I guess this is goodbye. It is. He walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. There was no anger, no resentment, just gratitude. Because losing someone who couldn't stand beside me during the hardest moment of my life made room for a life where I would never have to question my worth again. Sometimes the person who walks away from you is actually making space for the life you were always meant to have. And looking back now, I don't remember the day my boyfriend left me. I remember the day I finally stopped leaving myself behind.